Alright, hey y'all. It's been a while. It's been a really long while. I started this YouTube channel last off season, last year, and I haven't gotten back for a really long time. I was planning on posting a video about my experiences living in Mexico over last summer, quite a while ago, and things have just not worked out. But yeah, now I have the chance, so we're gonna go for it. I won't be mentioning people's names for the most part due to just personal privacy and safety. I might have a video with some photos and such from Mexico, and I won't have any other people's faces in it because, again, I just want the safety and privacy of other people to be respected. So, yeah, here we go. So, originally, I went on my first missions trip to Mexico with our youth group when I was probably 17 years old, 16 or 17. We heard from another church that volunteered up here that they went and they visited these people in Mexico. There's this couple that runs an organization called Connections House. The couple is Ron and Christy Struska. People say the name differently every time. And this church would once a year for about a week at a time, or more, a couple weeks, or less, just a weekend, they would go down and they would volunteer with this organization and they would do outreaches. So basically during outreaches in this organization, what you do is you go to places around Mexico and you either provide food or you do face painting. There's all sorts of activities for kids and such. Oftentimes, you'll do some worship, leaded worship, or you'll share a message. Um, Ron and Christy basically take groups from the US and Canada and they host them at their facility. If anybody ever wants to go there and volunteer for them or look into an internship like the one that I did, feel free to go and take a look at that. The link to the Connections House website is in my channel description. So feel free to go ahead and find that. So our youth group decided to go on this trip. We went for about a weekend. It was a short exposure trip. Um, it was amazing and life changing for me. At the time, I had just recently come back to Christ. I could say a million things about that trip, but I'm going to keep it short. We provided food for some of these children. You go down to Mexico, it's weird because there's stray dogs everywhere. There's dogs in every backyard because they are used as security. They have street markets, Mexican street markets everywhere where people just pop up tents and sell stuff. It's very easy to get scammed as Americans because they look at us and they think, oh, they don't know how prices work down here. And so they'll give you prices higher than they should be. You're not supposed to call it America. You're supposed to say you're from the United States because Mexico is part of North America. Mexican people are very sweet, they're very generous, they can be very kind, they can be very welcoming. But you also have to be very guarded with your belongings because I had a friend named Yessie who she was kind of an intern counselor when I was there. She would say, I love my people and I love my country, but I know my people. Because her people, the Mexican people, tend to steal a lot. Belongings are not super safe. Your car has to stay locked. You cannot leave any bags in your car. You can't leave anything in your car. If somebody looks through your windows and sees that there might be something valuable in there, they will take it. Ron and Christy, because of that, often keep people's passports locked for them in a safe inside the Connections House facility until for the duration of people's stay, just to keep it safe so that if something gets stolen, passports don't get stolen and they can still get out of Mexico and back into the US. So that's kind of the setting that we're in. Rosarito, the place where Ron and Christy are stationed, They're partnered with a church called Calvary Rosarito. And Calvary Rosarito, the pastor of that church is actually from the US. His name is Pastor Mike, and he actually used to own a cabin up here. Well, his family used to own a cabin up here where I live. So, small world. But he went to Mexico and started a church. It's bilingual. Feel free to look up them on YouTube as well. It's Calvary Rosarito. Wonderful church. I loved it there. They do communion every single week, and they have church services different times of the day every single day. It's amazing. They're always open, and they do an altar call every single church session. And they do baptisms. I think they do every few months. And then otherwise around Rosarito, it's kind of your small town. Well, not small town. It's not big city. It's not small town. It's not countryside. In Mexico, all the buildings tend to be very squished together in a lot of areas. There's less construction codes and such, and building codes and rules and laws. So everything is different colors and shapes and sizes. Oftentimes, families have their businesses on the bottom floor of their little itty bitty building, and then they live on the top floor. However, there's also places where people don't really have houses. People have partial buildings, or they have to make their own things with cardboard and wood pallets and stuff like that. Um, there's areas where the road is pretty well developed. Most places don't have street signs, or street names, so you kind of have to. It's hard to navigate sometimes if you don't know what you're doing. There are roads that don't seem like they're roads at all. They're dirt roads that you could go hiking on. It's hard to believe that vehicles pass over those roads all the time, but they do. But then there's also some areas of Mexico where there's bigger city. It's nicer. There's tall buildings, bigger places. That's the entire basic setting of Mexico. So my youth group went for a weekend, and we went to one of the more dilapidated areas of town. Um, One of those places where the dirt roads, it's like you're crossing the Grand Canyon sometimes. And we went there and we provided food for these kids. We did some worship, and we did some messages. Ron and Christy often find translators and volunteers to go with us from the church that they're partnered with. So we did that. There were some girls that reminded me of my little sisters that I really bonded with. I played with them for a whole day. Um, they cried when I had to leave, and it was really sad. They tried to feed me food even though they were starving pretty much, which was really sweet. It was just a whole moment of seeing this brokenness in the world and feeling God calling me to help them. So we got back from Mexico. We had kept a journal through the whole thing about our experiences and what God was teaching us through our experiences there. So I took a lot with me from that trip. Our youth group leader, Kevin, announced that there was an internship that once you turn 18, you can do either over the spring or the summer. And basically, you would do the same thing that we did for that little missions trip as a youth group. Basically, you raise money and then you go on this trip and you do what we did there. So I was really excited, and me and my best friend at the time looked at each other and I went, "We should do that." And she was excited too, and yeah, we should do that. And we were both planning on doing that once we both turned 18. And so we it was a whole year. I moved into some dorms provided by the place that I work at and live at. Moved out of my parents' house because I wanted to learn how to be on my own, even though my parents' house is like 10 feet away. And so I moved in with my best friend. We had some conflicts. We clashed. There were some issues. There were misunderstandings. There was dishonesty and lies. It became a very toxic relationship. And for me, I had to personally step out of that, sadly. And so that friendship kind of ended. I ended up having to sit there and ask myself, okay, even if nobody I know goes with me, do I still want to do this? Is this what God is calling me to do? Or did I just want to go because I was going to go with my best friend? And so I just felt this really strong pull, and I felt like God was telling me that I had to go there, that that was the place that I was going, and that was what I was going to do. And so I sent out maybe like 60 letters. I was very anxious because it was a new place. I hadn't been out of country, much less out of state, very often. My family does not travel much. We never went on a lot of vacations as I was growing up. I had just turned 18. I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Um, I had just gotten my driver's license and didn't even have a car yet. I just felt kind of clueless, and I didn't know if there were going to be any other interns. I didn't know if I was going to be bad at this. I didn't know what to expect. Um, and I was just absolutely terrified because I felt like I was just stepping into the unknown. And I was also scared that I wasn't going to be able to raise the funds in order to go, and then I didn't know what I was going to do if I couldn't go. But I sat there waiting, I sat there praying, and I just complete surrender to God. I just, would bow my head and just, God, if this is where you want me to go, and if this is your will for my life, and you want me to be a missionary in Mexico over the summer, I'm holding this entire thing with open hands. You do with it what you want. If you want me to go there, provide a way. I know that you will if you want me to. And so I waited and waited and waited. I got a couple letters back, a little bit of money. Not much. I had to raise, I think, 1,500. I was kind of starting to freak out toward the end because I had a month, half a month left before I had to go to Mexico. Either I could pay and go or not pay and not go. And I was sitting there waiting. I had like 3 letters. And then all of a sudden, the last half a month to a month, right before I went to Mexico, all of a sudden things started rolling in. I got maybe like 5 to 10 letters back total out of the 60 that I sent out. Finally, the money rolled in, and I actually ended up with extra. And so that was amazing to see God provide in that way. I remember I got there. I got across the border. My dad dropped me off. We were sitting in a Chick-fil-A, and Christy's daughter came to pick us up because something had gone wrong in the scheduling, and Christy wasn't able to pick me up herself. So her daughter took me over the border. I remember my little sister was just crying. She was holding on to me. She did not want me to leave. And I ended up crying on the drive through the border because I was so sad because it finally hit me that I was leaving my family and my little sister and everything that I knew, and I was just going completely alone into a world that I didn't know except for God. I kind of just cried, and then I, you know, took a breath. We went through the border, and then I got to Connection's house, and they had a group in. There was a group of maybe 20 kids and a few adults, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. Everything was rushing. I got there, and as soon as we pulled in, they said, okay, drop off your stuff in the room right here. Okay, let's go. Get in the truck. And then I got in the truck, and then we left. It was like 5 minutes. And then we stopped at this building, and then there was a group that was in from the US, from Chicago, and we all got out of vehicles and stuff and went into this restaurant to eat. And I was like, I don't know anyone here. I don't know what's going on. I just got here and I'm suddenly here. Um, and so then we ate food, and then we got back to the Connections house after eating, and then we kind of just stopped, and then it was like, okay, your intern counselor here, Yessie, who, by the way, she would never stop talking. And there were some things that knew she was trying to be helpful, but because of my own pride, I felt like, I'm not that dumb. I know how to do this. I'm not, like, I'm responsible, but then as time went on, I grew to absolutely love her, and now she's one of the best friends that I have. It was a learning experience, and yes, he's amazing. So she showed me, here's the bed. Like, you could take any of these beds, go ahead and choose which one. You could put your stuff here. She moved a lot of her stuff for me because her stuff was kind of everywhere. Um, I got moved in, and then I basically just like showered and laid down in bed and was like, okay, cool. So then I just like slept through the night. There's dogs barking outside, there's cars driving by. I got used to a lot of new sounds. There were different birds. I live up in the middle of the woods, so it was weird being in the middle of the city. There were always cars that would drive by, and it wasn't just the cars that would drive by. It would be they have loudspeakers on their cars advertising things in Spanish so loud that I swear you can hear them from 100 miles away. There's people with ice cream trucks and not ice cream trucks, ice cream carts, like they're pushing them themselves. Um, Going by, there were some people next door that did some welding or woodworking or sawing of some sort. I don't know. They were always doing some sort of projects in their backyard. There were all sorts of new sounds everywhere. New sounds, new smells. The bed sheets were thinner than what I was used to. The pillow was flatter than what I was used to. The air was absolutely humid because Rosarito is kind of near to the coast. The weather was very, I don't know, it was very neutral for the most part. It doesn't get very dramatic changes throughout the seasons there. Um, but yeah, it was just a completely new atmosphere. Um, and so then we kind of went through some intern orientation, but then parts of it weren't really completed. But for the most part, we got everything figured out. But yeah, I was kind of just thrown into it. Um, but the people were really nice. They were really amazing. But they ran on a very tight schedule. They were very strict about you had to be on time to things, preferably 10 minutes early to everything. Um, we were to work in the kitchen most of the week. We had some off days. They very much so prioritized rest. They gave us off days to do whatever the heck we wanted with. But we had to eat meals, whether we wanted to or not. We had to be on time for meals. There was grace, but very little grace if you were late for something. It was go, 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 go all the time. And then, okay, we have a couple days to just sit here and rest. But honestly, I really like the strict schedule, and I feel like my sleep schedule was the best it has ever been because I'm a night owl. But I also work a job that sometimes I have to be up by 9 in the morning, and sometimes I have to be up by 4 in the morning. So I honestly was doing really, really well. But yeah, we worked in the kitchen, we would take teams places, and it was basically the same thing that we did with my youth group, but for an entire summer. When I got there, one of my fears was kind of confirmed. I was scared that I was going to be the only intern, and I practically was. There was one girl who was 15. They made an exception and let her come as an intern, but she was from around the area. She lived nearby. She lived in Tijuana, or as the locals like to call it, TJ. Um, Tijuana is like Chicago or LA, it's that type of a thing. But she lived very nearby, and she was local. She knew English enough to get by. And then our intern counselor lived with us, kind of like an intern. She was there both as a friend and as a counselor at the same time. And she was also from the area, and she had been going to school to become an interpreter for quite a while, so she was pretty much fluent in English. So that was nice. And then, other than that, it was it. There was no interns from the US or Canada or anything like that. The first group left, and then we got another group, and I just remember one of the guys from that group, we had a spontaneous worship night. Yessie and I were going to go make s'mores because s'mores were her favorite thing, which I appreciated. We were going to go eat s'mores, so we built a fire up on their deck, up on their balcony. But then the group kind of slowly joined us, and then it somehow turned into a spontaneous worship night, which was actually really, really cool and so much fun. And I don't remember any of their names, and I barely remember anything about them because they were only there for a few days. And for the most part, they went out and did their own little trips. And we didn't take them out, they were just staying with us, and we were just feeding them. But I remember there was this one guy who he shared his testimony, well, part of his testimony, and he was talking about how he basically was kind of a successful guy where he worked and stuff. One of those just ambitious people who seems to have everything together. Basically, everything was going right. And then all of a sudden, he just heard God say, okay, slow it down and focus on me. And he ended up actually getting fired from his job, and his life kind of turned upside down a little bit. And he heard God tell him, no, okay, listen, you have a whole list of things to do, and that's not wrong. But the thing is, with every single thing that you want to do, listen, where am I on that list of things to do? He thought about it for a second and then just went, God is not first on that list. And he felt that conviction, and then he just felt God tell him, okay, listen, I don't want to be a number on the list. I don't want to be on the list. I want to be the list. I want to be with you in this, in this, in this, in step 1 and 2 and 3. I want to be with you in every single number of the list. I want to be the top priority to the point in which I am everything. And so the trajectory of this guy's life just kind of changed, and that's how he ended up in Mexico, leading his little group of kids through all the missionary work that they ended up doing. So that was a really cool testimony here. And then I remember the next day at breakfast, I had sat down, because I sat down with a lot of random people over summer, because we had a little dining hall in the compound and a bunch of tables, and us as interns, we were told to try to connect with people and get to know people and ask people about their testimonies and really, really try to get to know people. That's why it's called Connections House. Connections House, their mission is to connect people with church, with Christ, and with each other. That's basically what it was all about. And so I sat down at the table with this dude, and he asked me what God had been teaching me in life recently. And I was like, I'm not really sure. And so he encouraged me to really just take notes on everything, on every sermon and all the things, just random little phrases or things that people tell you, or like songs that popped up that just like stick out to you, and just write it all down and then go through everything later. Like, pray to God, show me what you're trying to tell me, and look back at everything and see how everything connects. Because honestly, when you look back in life, all the dots just kind of connect and you go, oh, that's what God was doing. And so I kind of took that, and I have a million different notebooks now, and I'm always looking for all the connections. I'm always looking for the message. I saw that kind of happen even while I was in Mexico. There were just references like the fishes and loaves in the Bible that was referenced here and there and everywhere. Like, there was a whole, God was telling me to give him everything that I have so that he could use it for his purposes, because he knows better and he's in control and he loves us and he knows us better than we know ourselves, and he has good plans for us. That was one thing that I really learned that summer. But there was a group there for a while called CSOM, CSOM, Calvary School of Missions. They were there for 6 weeks out of the entire summer that I was there. So I really got to know that group. And I'm still in contact with a few of them, actually. And they've made some good godly community. I can't say that I'm super close with any of them, that I absolutely know them super well, that they're my best friends. But they're my church. They're my people. And they're friends that God has provided me, and brothers and sisters in Christ that God has provided me, because I need godly people to lean on. Sometimes even living here at a Christian camp, I can't find that. And it can be really, really hard, even in Christian community, to find people who truly love God and truly give their entire lives to Christ and who are really going to push you in that direction. So that's really what I found there. But CSOM, basically, what they were all about is kids could apply for it. Same thing with raising money and stuff, like you would for any other missions trip, through letters or social media or whatever. Um, Basically, their purpose was to bring kids who are just out of high school or a whole bunch of different ages. But basically, it was like a missionary school of sorts. They had two programs, CSOM and then another one. CSOM was introductory. Here's what missions work is about. Here, we're going to go through some experiences and just kind of see what this mission stuff is about and why we would do it and how you know whether or not that's your calling and all of that. They went through a bunch of classes when they were there. They would go through one, I think, every day, one or two every day. And us interns were allowed to sit on any of them if we wanted to, so long as we didn't just walk in the middle of it and disrupt it or anything like that. So I went to every single one that I could. I went and joined them in so many things that it got to a point in which one of the girls, by the end of everything there, she was introducing me to one of the speakers that came to visit, because they had missionaries come to speak and share their testimonies and their experiences and lead classes and stuff. They had one come like every week or so. Um, and so she was introducing me to one of the people who were gonna speak, and was like, "Yeah, this is Brooklyn. She's basically an honorary member of CSOM, but she's one of the interns here." Um, but yeah, they had all of these classes. They went through Romans and Acts a lot. Um, and then on top of those classes, us interns were doing our own devotional on a book called Unfinished: The Hole in Our Gospel, which basically talks about how people come to Christ, but they don't tend to get the part about the Great Commission, and that you're supposed to bring people to Christ, and you're supposed to point your entire life in a direction that follows Christ. What does it look like after you've been saved, basically? So that was really good. I recommend that. Go ahead and look that up if you want. Um, and then So I had those classes, I had that devotional, I had my own personal devotionals. They actually made us sign a paper that said that we would make our own Jesus time every single day for the duration of our time there. So I had my own devotionals there. And then on top of that, there were, a couple other groups that would come through that would do their own little things that I was part of. We went to church every single Sunday, and we went to church every Wednesday as well as interns. There was just so much pouring in, and CSOM, the group, when they were there, they were amazing. It gave me so much hope in community, because the community that I'm from, at least people my age, I'm not saying everybody, and I'm not trying to just be mean and be like, my community sucks, okay? I'm not. There are some beautiful parts of the community here. But the people my age up here tend to, it's all gossip and it's all drama. And people can't just leave each other alone or treat each other with respect. People don't really, it's hard to find people my age who love on each other with the love of Christ. It's so hard. But I was there with CSOM, and around every corner, someone was praying for someone. Even it was just, "Oh, hey, how's your day going? Oh, it's doing great. Oh, man, can I pray for you? Hey, how you doing? My friend just died. Oh, man, let me pray for you." They were there for each other in every single moment. They were praying non-stop, constantly, without ceasing, like the Bible says to. I had been prayed over by my parents before. Other than that, there might have been a couple times that I was prayed over here in a group of people, like they were praying over us as a youth group or whatever, but I hadn't ever been actually prayed over before. And so it was amazing having people ask me, "What's your testimony? What's God teaching you? Do you know the love of Christ?" I had somebody ask me, "Have you ever felt the presence of God?" The amount of discussions that we had, the amount that we got to know each other through Christ, I don't care if I know what their favorite color was. We bonded over Jesus. There was so little gossip that I saw. It was amazing, and I was so sad to leave that community. And then, I mean, at the end, when before CSOM left, they were actually reading a book every week. One of them was Radical by David Platt, that seemed to be everybody's favorite. Maybe I'm wrong, but, seemed to be everyone's favorite. Another one was Strategy of Satan. I don't remember the author. I haven't read any of the books yet, actually, but they gave me a whole stack of books because they had one to read every week. Otherwise, they had speakers come and tell their testimonies. They had speakers come from really dangerous countries. They had people that it was like, okay, there's no photos, don't take photos of them. Don't take photos of their faces. Don't tell anybody about their names or where they are or anything. Like, it was confidential for their own safety. Because there are countries like where if you're going to try to preach the gospel there, it's illegal and you could be killed for it. If their faces were posted on social media, even by accident, and it was in relation to missionary work or Jesus, they could be killed. some of the testimonies I heard were insane. There were things where people had weird dreams, or they saw these things or signs or something. Someone prayed something over them, and then those things came true. They literally prophesied. There were times when absolute miracles happened, or these unexplained awful things that made no logical sense would happen to them, but then they would miraculously be fixed in ways that were just as unexplainable. So, us interns and CSOM and a couple other groups, we went on plenty of outings. We went and preached the gospel to plenty of people. We gave out church invitations. I painted a number of kids' faces because, I don't know, that just somehow ended up being my thing. And it was really amazing to be part of that and to be doing that every single day. Even in the monotonous life that we live every single day, it's the familiar everyday life. Even then, I would encourage anybody to just seek out God in your everyday life, to take up your cross every single day, as the verse says, and follow Him, to lay your lives down and make everything about Jesus. Because even if you're not a missionary and you're still just working, I don't know, you don't even have to be working for a Christian organization. You don't even have to be working for a Christian camp like I am right now. Literally anything. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're doing, so long as you're following God's call for your life and He is the focus of your life. Because when He is the focus of your life, that will overflow into so many different sections of your life. If you're focused on God, God will use you in one way or another. So we went and did a bunch of outreaches, and a lot of them were successful. There was one time where there were like 12 people who stood up in church and gave their lives to Christ. And I remember there was this girl from CSOM who had met this lady and invited her to church. She had been in contact with this lady who was unsure about Christ and stuff, and she came to the church, and then she was one of the 12 people that gave their life to Christ. There were so many success stories that blew my mind. And then there were also sometimes, because it's reality, that it didn't work out. I remember there was one time, me and some of the CSUN people had walked around the block and handed out invitations to one of the things that we were doing. And there, on our way back, we saw this guy laying on a park bench, and he was kind of obviously drunk. And we walked up to him as a group, and hey man, like, you okay? Like, what's going on? What you doing? We have this thing going on over here if you want to come. This guy was not going to listen. He did not. He said, I gave God a chance. I struggle with a drinking addiction. I asked for him to take away this addiction. I asked for him to fix some of my relationships with my family, and it's just not happening. And he seemed to have this mindset where he thought, if I ask God for something, He'll just snap His finger and then it'll come true. I won't have any more cravings for alcohol or anything. And it, of course, didn't work out that way. So we really, really tried to give him the gospel and spread the word to him. But he wasn't willing to listen, and in the end, he just ended up completely closed off to us and completely just, no, no, God hates me. God does not care about me. And that was heartbreaking to see, because without Christ, there's such hopelessness. If you don't really know Him, if you don't really follow Him, there's no hope. So sometimes there were just times like that. Anyway, there were just some other random things that happened here and there where, you know, in the Devo that we were reading, it mentioned that God is like a GPS. You look at Him and He tells you to go places, and sometimes you make a wrong turn, it recalculates, and then you keep going in the direction that you're supposed to, It compared God to a GPS, and then later on, some Mexican kid living in a dump told another intern that he looks at God as a GPS, and then it was mentioned again in a sermon later on that we all went to, and it was like, this is insane. Everything is connecting. Like, so cool. And then there were other times where, there was this girl who her friend died. And I just sat there and she was crying and she was having a really hard time. And it was really hard to watch because my grandpa had been diagnosed with liver cancer just a couple months before I went to Mexico. I actually considered not going to Mexico because I might have wanted to be at home and I might have wanted to be there in case he left and went to heaven. while I was gone because I didn't want to miss him. But I thought, you know what? No. God wants me to be here. I'm going to go there anyway. And so there were some times where I sat there crying because my grandpa is dying. At the time, I was in a relationship, and honestly, there was so much tension there because I loved the guy, but at the same time, I felt like I was completely diving headfirst all in for Christ, and it didn't feel like he was going the same direction. And there were some times where I questioned our relationship. That relationship actually ended up not working out, which was really hard, but really good. There was some times where it was really hard. But if I'm being honest, the entire time that I was there, even though there were some hard moments, I never felt homesick. And I feel really bad saying that, but honestly, I think God just helped me in that. He gave me the disposition, He gave me the point of view. He helped me not feel homesick so that I could focus on what I was doing and do it well and to the best of my ability and focus on Him. I was so happy to be there and I was so present. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my entire life. It was life changing. There was one time where I was having a really emotional day because, my mom was sending me updates on my grandpa as I was there. And there was a day where there was a group there that I didn't really know. Um, and they had done their little worship night or whatever. They were outside and they were doing worship out on the balcony as the sun was going down. And I sat down and I was worshiping with them. I didn't know any of their names or anything, but I just was. And I was sitting there petting Christine Ron's dog, Mocha. Usually Mocha doesn't necessarily, I don't know, she's not mean, but she's not, and she's friendly. She just isn't one of those dogs that's like, pet me, pet me, pet me. But she just laid down and let me pet her the entire time. It was like she knew that I was emotional and struggling because I was about to cry the entire night. But I was just, you know, recently in life, especially during Mexico, whenever things got hard, I've had a posture of things are hard, worship God more. You know, things are really hard, turn to God more, lean into God as hard as you possibly can when things get harder. So I was sitting there worshiping, absolutely brokenhearted inside because everything just, my grandpa was dying. So I was about to cry, and this dog is letting me pet her. I pet her until literally my fingers were like covered in grime and dirt because these are outdoor dogs, and I was like, this is gross. But there was this lady who came up to me and saw that I was a little bit upset and a little bit off, even though I didn't know her, and she prayed over me, and I didn't tell her. I didn't tell her what was going on. Nothing. She just goes, "Hey, how you doing? What's your name? Where you from? Can I pray for you?" I didn't tell her any details about anything that was going on in my life. I just told her who I was and where I was from. And she prays for all the broken parts of my family. She prays for my family's struggles and the hard times that we might be going through. How did she know that my family was going through a hard time? My grandpa was the grandpa of 27 grandchildren. And he and his wife had a beautiful marriage. My grandma is one of the people that I look up to the most, and I looked up to their marriage as I want that. I want mine to look like that one. My grandparents were so close. We used to see them like once a month when I was really little, and whenever we went down for shopping or, you know, doctor's appointments and stuff. They were a huge part of our lives. I love horseback riding. It's the one thing that I could do all day, every day. I have a picture of them up there with me as like a 5-year-old on the back of one of their horses, which is still alive now, by the way. My grandparents are very influential in my life, and I love them to death. And my grandpa, he connected with people through food. He shared Christ with them to a point at which we knew him for that. He loved his hymns and stuff. His entire funeral and memorial in the end ended up being a whole altar call, a whole this is who Christ is, and this is how Joe, my grandpa, showed that through his life. This is how God used him. And then it was basically just saying, Joe would want you to give him a chance. Come to Jesus. That was what his memorial was about. Over 200 people showed up. My grandpa was an amazing man. God used him so much. Anyway, He wasn't gone yet, but he was dying. And I hadn't told this lady about that. How did she know? And so many moments like that happened where people started praying for me, and I was like, how do you know about that? I hadn't told anybody that. No, I don't. What? But it was just a moment where I was like, whoa, there ain't no way God didn't do that. Like, those are a lot of the experiences that I had while CSUN was there. Toward the end, I like almost cried when they were about to leave because they were gonna leave the next day, and before anybody woke up at like 3 in the morning, me and the other interns and Ron and Christy were gonna go on a plane flight down to southern Mexico, all the way on the peninsula, like the tip of the peninsula, to a place called Calpulalpan. Look up where that is. Look up all the places on the map, okay? Just it's cool. Um and so I was saying goodbye to them. They were having one of their last worship nights, and the worship nights were one of my favorite things ever. It was amazing to get together. They would put a bunch of chairs in a huge circle around the room upstairs where we ate food. They would move all the tables to the side of the building. And then they would have these Mexican blankets that Ron and Christy owned, and they would lay them all in kind of like a smaller circle inside. And then they would have a huge map of the world. And that would be in the center of the room, and then they would sit there and they would pray. They would do worship. There was a lady who led worship there, um, and she had one of the most beautiful voices, I swear. And she could project her voice like nothing else. And so some people would do like the cajon, some people would do like the guitar, and they would sing. There's another girl who had a really pretty voice. There were a lot of musically inclined people there. Um, and so we would all sing worship together, and then people would just you would sing worship, and then there would just be just the guitar. People would be sitting there praying. People would read verses out of their Bible as they felt called. People would start praying over each other as they felt called. They would move around the room and silently pray over each other as they went. Those were some of the most amazing points, like, in time to exist at. Like, I loved it. I'm an introvert and I'm not outgoing. I didn't really speak out or anything like that. There were a couple moments where I went to pray over people. I was all in for the worship and stuff, but I loved it. It was amazing. And I never wanted those moments to end. And of course they did. But they would do that at least once a week. But so they were doing one last one, and I had to say goodbye to everybody. I got hugs from everybody. A small group of them, the ones that I was kind of closest with, all gathered around me and they prayed over me. And I was like, I almost cried in that moment. I was like, God, help me. Help me stay strong. Why am I such an emotional person? But it was amazing as they just prayed over me. And then I went downstairs, and then I was like, well, that's it, I guess. I still have a few of their numbers, and I still keep in contact with a few of them. Some of them decided not to be missionaries after CSOM. Some of them decided to go into the second program that they have, which is the training to be a missionary, and then they assign you to a place and you go there with a group of people. Um, so some of them are going to become missionaries, and some of them are looking for opportunities elsewhere because they didn't feel called to the mission field. Um, but yeah, and so we said goodbye to them. And then we went down to Calpulalpan, where Ron and Christy's daughter, and her name is Brittany. Brittany and her husband started their own church and planted their own church down there. It was very small, but slowly growing. They had a couple little kids, cutest little things ever. Um, and they were trying to start a camp, a Christian camp, first one in the area, first one down there, really. Um, and so for like 3 days we were there and we helped that. It was just like one quick overnight camp. Maybe like 20 kids showed up, but it was really cool. We had s'mores with the kids. They had never had s'mores before. There was a huge bonfire. We had a bunch of games and stuff. We um did some worship and messages and stuff. And then after all the kids left, we had a day of church and outreach. And then toward the end, we went and we saw the Aztec pyramids. It was really cool to see them because it's such a cool part of history. But at the same time, it was also really sad because of the history as well, because the Aztec pyramids, so many people were sacrificed there. So many weird gods and stuff were worshipped, false gods and stuff. Still, so many people worship false gods today. And I mean, there's people over there who they set off fireworks because they think that it's going to scare away rain and tornadoes and stuff. Or was it because they call the rain? I don't remember, but there's some wacky beliefs down there. But yeah, so we saw those, and then we saw one of the first churches to ever be built in Mexico. We went around and drove through some of the fancier cities down there, had some nice meals and this and that and the other, and then we flew all the way back up here. One story that I want to mention is that when we were down at the pyramids, it started to get a little bit windy and it started to rain a little bit. And Christy was like, "Hey, are we ready to leave?" And we were like, "Yeah, let's go." And so we left. And for some reason, while I was there, in my brain, I just kind of went, "Haha, watch there be like a tornado here or something." You know, I don't know why. I don't know where that thought come from. It came from. It wasn't. It wasn't funny. It wasn't because I had the thought, and then later on, we were a couple hours away, eating at a Carl's Jr. in southern Mexico. Yes, they have one of those down there. And on the news, there was a tornado in the spot where we had just been, and I think like a few people had died or something like that. And I was like, okay, God just saved us from that. Yeah, so that was just another random interesting moment. But then we came back from that trip and got back to the compound up in Rosarito. And so we were just there for like a week or two. Kind of just hung out. We kind of spent some nights together. We did some game nights. We did some movie nights and stuff. We went horseback riding on the beach. I'm very sad though because I didn't get any photos from that. We went and we saw what's called a blowhole, where the rocks on the cliffside of the beach are like formed in a certain way, and then the waves come up, and because they hit the rocks in a certain way, and the air is in there a certain way, I don't know physics. The it'll like sprout up like a whale's blowhole. Like that's what it looks like. It's just like, whoo, you know. So if I do a video of a bunch of videos and photos from Mexico, that'll probably be in it. Um, so we did that sort of a thing, and then one of the ladies who had went down to Calpulalpan with us, she offered some free massages at her little place because she owns like a little cafe slash massage spa thing. Um, so we got some massages, and that was the first time that I ever felt homesick because I was sitting there and I was just like, honestly, I was on a whole spiritual high the entire time, and it was the most amazing experience ever. And then the last week that I was there, I just hit rock bottom, and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't know what it is. I've loved it here, and I don't want to not want to be here, but I don't want to be here. I want to go home. I don't know why. Like I just all of a sudden I felt homesick, and so I was sitting there, and they used orange essential oil, and I almost started crying because this orange essential oil reminded me of all of the orange fields near where I live that you drive through. And in the orange season, when you just drive through and the entire car just smells like oranges, that's what I thought of. Or picking oranges at my grandma's house or my cousin's house where they own a whole orchard. Out of all things, orange essential oil and a massage. And I was sad and I wanted to go home. And then I did. But yeah, I remember there was like a little fire building competition that we did at one point toward the end there where I was burning my fingers. Like basically we had a string like over like wood and fire. We were supposed to try to get the fire started without any like lighters or anything, just flint and steel and wood. And I was getting it up there. It was starting to work, but I kept burning my fingers. They were sore for a while afterward. And I was just so frustrated and I just wanted to go home. I was eating peanut butter and jelly every day. I felt like crap and I was just like, I'm done here. So, this is a good song. Brooks and Dunn. What's it called? Ain't Nothing About You. Okay, so another couple random stories that I'm just remembering now that the story's pretty much almost over. I remember there was one time I got sick. I got sick a couple times. One time it was with like stomach bugs sort of a thing. The second time I got sick with, I had fevers and was shivering and burning up every day for like a week. I would shower, I would try Advil, I would try this and that and the other. I would be in bed all day. This was actually when CSOM was coming, so I didn't meet them for the first week, but everyone else met them. So I came out and I was like, I feel bad because I haven't existed for the past few days, and suddenly I do, and no one knows me, and I know no one. Um, but I was sitting in my room, absolutely just like dying with fever, just chugging water and eating apples pretty much. And I had a headache. And when I say I had a headache, I, it was the worst pain I have ever felt in my entire life. And I have a high pain tolerance. I have such a high pain tolerance. This hurt like nothing else. I was crying half the time, but also trying to make myself not cry because crying made it worse. But also, it was like I would sit there, and if I was not moving, no light, no voice, nothing, steadily breathing, eyes closed, laying in my bed, not moving at all, complete silence, this huge throbbing migraine like I had never had before. And I it was so hard not to cry, but I had to try to force myself not to cry. And if I ever moved or the light changed at all or my breathing became too heavy or I don't know, there was a loud sound or like just a little bit of sound somewhere, it would suddenly send shooting pain through my head and my neck and my back. And it was just the worst thing that I had ever felt before. And it just went for a week straight. And then I even took some of Christy's, like, she has like chronic migraines and stuff. So she had something that was for that. And that helped a little bit, but it didn't fix it. And then it just kind of just kept going. Advil did nothing. Didn't matter how much I would take. No, nothing. Didn't make a dent in the pain. And it got to a point at which we almost shipped me off to. We almost went back over the border to go to the San Diego hospital. It was that bad. Like we were gonna go the next day, and then it just suddenly stopped, and I was fine. I was like, "What just happened?" And then I'm able to see some people, and I was fine. There was another time where we had done some work at an orphanage that was being built. It was just like the stone and stuff. And somehow I had come out of it with bug bites all over my body. And we couldn't figure out if it was fleas or this or that or whatever. And so I just kind of had to live with it for a little bit. And then after the first 2 days, I stopped finding bites all over. And then it just like slowly got better, but it was the itchiest thing ever. I was like, what? And no one else was affected, and we had all been doing the same work, you know? And so it was just like, well, cool, I guess. So that happened. And then there was also, everybody got sick with stomach bugs when we were down in southern Mexico. And I don't really think I ever got that, but my digestive system was a little bit weird after eating some chilaquiles, which is basically like chips with like a spicy sauce over them. And dude, they were told not to make it spicy. It was so spicy that none of the Mexican kids down there ate it. They were just like, nope, nope, nope. Me and Ron, somehow, out of everyone, just downed the entire thing, and I loved it. It tasted like my mom's enchiladas, but like 100 times spicier. Yeah, it was pretty, like, my mouth was burning for forever after that. I'm surprised it didn't go numb. But yeah, my gut didn't like me for like a week after that. But they were good chilaquiles. But so there were like a few random moments of sickness, and then right after getting back from Mexico, I kept getting sick for like a couple months afterward because my body had adjusted to all of the viruses in Mexico, and I had missed out on a lot of sicknesses that happened here in the US when I was gone over the summer. And my body was basically just catching up. So I went through a couple fevers, I went through some stomach stuff, I went through colds and this and that and the other, and a bunch of random stuff. And then I finally got better, and I've been able to work for quite a while now without just falling over sick. Um, but yeah, so Mexico ended, and then I came home, and um, one of my little brothers was shorter than me when I left, and suddenly he was taller than me. I've been warned about this. I'd been warned that everybody went through different experiences than I did when I was gone. I was disconnected from my community, and things had happened when I was gone, and I was gonna experience reverse culture shock, um, and all of that. But it was not how I imagined it to be. I imagined it just to be like for example, when I first came back from Mexico, my dad and I stopped by a Mexican restaurant, and what was it? Somebody was passing me, and I said, "Con permiso." I mean, excuse me. Like there were some moments like that, and in Mexico also, when you use the bathroom, nothing solid is allowed down the toilet. You can't even put toilet paper down it. Only liquid can go down the toilets because the plumbing sucks in most places. So coming back to the US, it was hard not to just throw everything in the trash. And I was like, no, we use the bathroom normally here. And then I was able to drink out of sinks and stuff. I didn't have to be super picky about what I drank as far as water. Because when you go to Mexico, also at the same time, there's a lot of viruses in the water that our bodies are not accustomed to because we don't live in Mexico. So, um, and then at the same time, there were moments where, like, you know, when you're ordering at a restaurant, like, I got used to all the things being in Spanish and me not being able to read it and me just going, that one. Like, I used to be really picky and I used to be like, I can't decide what I want. Take me anywhere. I'm gonna just say that one. I don't care what it is at this point. At least I can read it. you know? Um, but I got used to everything being in Spanish and trying to figure that out. I had so many fish tacos and stuff, shrimp tacos. Best thing ever. I now cannot eat eggs or anything without hot sauce. I am addicted to the spicy. Give me spicy chips. I recently had my first cavity, most likely because of all the spicy stuff that I was eating. Um, and there's also just things like in Mexico, everything is agua, everything is water. You want orange juice? Naranja agua. Like everything, you could have a jug of orange juice, and they say, go get the agua. Go get the what? The agua. Oh, no, the orange juice. Sorry. Oh, orange juice. Every beverage is called agua. Actually, not just water. So you have to kind of specify. So that was a weird one. A lot of it had to do with food and cuisine, actually. Um, yeah. There were just little things like that where it was just different coming back to the US. Honestly, I came back to the US and I saw the buildings and I was like, it's so boring and dull here. Like, and everything is not a million different colors. You know? It was just, honestly, it was really depressing coming back to the US because everything was different and I completely fallen in love with Mexico and I was going home. Which I wanted to go home. I wanted to be home, but I didn't want to be home either. I felt like I had home in two different places in two different ways. Um, Anyways, I came back. My brother had grown past me. There were friends that had moved away. There were some new people. There were some things had changed in at work, as far as leadership and the way that we did things. One of my friends who actually donated a lot to my missionary trip, I thank him greatly. He was such a good friend. He actually ended up putting himself in a psych ward because he had some really bad depression issues and suicidal thoughts and stuff, and he didn't want to hurt himself or anyone around him. So it was a wise decision on his part, but it was really sad to come back and hear about that on the first day, too. I. So many things had changed, but only in little ways for the most part. And it was just strange being back, and I wasn't on a mission with the community that I had built in Mexico anymore. I wasn't doing missionary work and doing outreaches every day, just preaching the gospel. I was back to now I just work in a kitchen again. life suddenly seems so monotonous, even though, like I said, you can make it not monotonous by living through Christ. I mean, you can still spread the gospel. It was just harder when it wasn't on a schedule and not with people who were completely and entirely dedicated and devoted every single second of the day to God. It's hard not being on people who around people who are on fire for God. And I remember I got home and I went and I took a shower in my parents' shower. Again, I hadn't lived with my parents before Mexico for like the whole fall and winter. So I was back at home. I soon moved back out into the dorms because I just like having my own space. More people move in here over summer, but over the winter, you get your own room. So I missed having my own space. But I ended up crying in the shower. And I was kind of just upset for a little while. It was hard to adjust back to life, but I did eventually. I was okay. It just took some time. But I think the statement that I can make, I just, it's so weird to come home and feel like you're home, but you're not home. And to crawl into your own bed with your own sheets and your own pillow. It smells like it was exactly how you left it and it has clean sheets and everything. It feels so weird to crawl back into your own bed and have it feel foreign to you just as much as it feels familiar to you. When you go on a long vacation, you come back and you go, I'm so glad to go into my own bed. I felt like that simultaneously with feeling, this isn't my bed. No, my bed was over there. What am I doing here? But this is my bed and it's so comfy and it's home. You will never feel a more confusing feeling in your entire life. I'm telling you. You know, it's kind of funny. My entire bed's changed now anyway. Went through a breakup and I was like, I'm me again. But so it's not even the bed that I came home to anymore. Actually, it's completely different now too, but wasn't that big of a change. But that was the weirdest feeling on the planet. So I kind of just had to rebuild a friend group because the people who I had known had left or we had issues right before I left or whatever. So a lot of friends have come in and out of my life. Honestly, things were okay for a little while and then they got really hard and now they're like awful but also amazing at the same time and really good and fine. Um but yeah, and honestly, since my experience, um barely anyone has asked about Mexico. When I first got back, the people who were like closest to me or I was around more would be like, "Hey, how was Mexico?" And I'd be like, "It was good." And then they would just kind of stop me there and like change the subject. Like nobody actually wanted to hear about it. My family did, but we never found the time. And then other than my family, there was only there was one guy who was like who asked me about it and who asked me what God taught me then and what my favorite part was about it and stuff like that. And honestly, that was such a meaningful moment. And then he prayed over me and I was like, honestly, after a while I forgot what I learned in Mexico. But then when that guy prayed over me, like asked me how Mexico was and about details and stuff, and then asked me how he could pray for me, and then he prayed over me right then and there, I was like, Mexico! Like, nobody prays over each other here. Some people ask, how can I be praying for you? And then, honestly, probably 90% of them never even do. I mean, I even do it sometimes, you know? But all of a sudden, I was like, wait, what have I been doing? Suddenly, all the Mexico memories came flooding back, and I was like, honestly, I think I kind of just dissociated myself from everything for a while because I didn't want to deal with all of that. Because honestly, it was kind of like mourning something because I was leaving that behind, you know? My home here, I was always going to come back to, so it was a little bit different, but Mexico, I want to take a couple other trips there. I almost ended up going with my youth group, but that's, again, another story for later. But Mexico's a place that it's possible for me not to end up going back. And right now, it's not in the plans for me to go back and stay there. So that's kind of how Mexico went. Again, there's plenty of stories that I definitely left out. It's definitely a long video. Yeah, that was my Mexico experience. It was amazing. It was impactful, and I will never be the same again. Actually, I came back and people were like, "You're so much more confident than you were before. Something's changed. You're different." And I was like, "Good." Yeah, if you made it through the whole video, I hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned for my life update, which is coming soon. I also have some book reviews coming up. Thinking about doing more song reviews soon. Um, so, yeah, definitely stick around for that. Subscribe if you want to. If you don't, I don't care. This YouTube channel, if you're new to it, is all about, well, some of it is just for fun. And then the other part of it is for sharing the gospel because Jesus is the center of my life and I love him and he saved me. And life with Jesus is amazing, even when you go through struggles. So, yep, welcome.